Delighted to say I'm joined by teacher, actor, playwright Andrew Carney to talk about his play, One Man Show. Can you tell us all about it and even where it came from, Andrew?
Thanks, Shane, and thanks for having me. It's called Sam Galway and the 12 Apostles. I would always have had an interest in the Dublin Galway final of 1983. Now, I was 6 years of age at the time, so I have a vague recollection of the day and a vague recollection of the disappointment. From a personal point of view, I was born in Dublin. My dad would have been working with RT at the time. He would have been Jim, the first presenter of the Sunday game, so we had a very good reason for living there and being there. But we moved back to Galway when I was 4, so I grew up as a Galway man, and I always shouted for Galway. But it's a sore defeat, and I was maybe a bit afraid of it for a few years. I had the idea for this play going back to 2013, the 30-year anniversary, but maybe afraid of offending people. I ran it by the old lad. He wasn't thrilled, we'll say. But I've explained it to him since, and he's on board now. So I just look at the cultural context, the game itself, what leads up to it, a bit of before, during, after, really, that type of narrative. And I suppose it's a work in progress as a script as well. I'll be going online at the end of the week in the Galway Fringe Festival. The page is up on Facebook, and the link to the event is there if anybody's curious. It's an early draft. It's part rehearsed reading, part performance, and I'm just going to take it forward from there then, and hopefully it'll go well. And it'll go from strength to strength.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, it's around the famous 1983 All Ireland final between Dublin and Galway, which the Dubs won 110 to 1-8. But of course, they went down to 12 men during that game. Some people call them the 12 Apostles. Some people say the Dirty Dozen. And just for those who don't know, it was Brian Mullins, Ray Hasley, and Kieran Duff who got sent off for Dublin. Tomas Tierney off for Galway as well. So, like, do you go more along the lines of Dirty Dozen and 12 Apostles? And is it just the fact that there was 4 men sent off in a final, which would have been even more unusual back then? Was that kind of the thing that made you think, geez, I can make something out of this?
Yeah, it was, Shane. And you've asked a good question there, because before I started writing the play, I probably felt Dirty Dozen, especially with the Galway bias. But the more I watched the match, I'm nearly convinced 12 Apostles. I think Dublin don't get the credit, really, in some quarters that they deserve for what was a miraculous victory. I mean, 12 men dug in, tactically smart, a great spirit, put the bodies on the line. They probably weren't the best team in the country at that time. There is a feeling that Galway were probably stronger in 82. Galway were going very well in 82. Nearly sprung a big surprise against Offaly in a semi that they were arguably maybe unlucky to lose. Eugene McGee, the late great Eugene, wrote in his book that they looked past Galway, were complacent, and Galway nearly caught them on the day. Galway, talking to a couple of former players in the research for this play, Galway, as strange as this sounds, always fancy Curry. And they feel privately, and there's always been a bit of swagger to Galway football. There's never a lack of confidence, I believe, and rightly so. They feel that they could have had a hop off Curry, that Curry were there for the taking, and they might have been the heroes rather than Seamus Darby and the boys. But by 1983, with Curry losing to Cork, Dublin spring was surprise against Offaly. Roscommon had been past their best there in Connacht. Galway beat them well in the league final in 81. Galway tended to have Mayo's number. So they staggered into a semi. We're lucky to beat a rising Donegal team. And by the final, I think both teams fancied it. Dublin, coming off the back of a great performance in the replay against Cork, wouldn't have been afraid of Galway. And from a Galway perspective then, they fancied Dublin, and a bit of revenge from the 74. There were players from both sides still around there. Billy Joyce, for example, was there a long time. So to get back to your question, I would admire the Dublin effort. I think the violence, it was there in isolated incidents, but especially talking to one or two of the former players for Galway, they feel there's an overemphasis on that conditions were very tough. The wind was howling, the rain was driving down, just kind of circumstances, really, you know. And we can talk about the sendings off, absolutely. The most infamous, well, closely followed by Pat O'Neill and Kieran Duff, would be Brian Mullins and Brian Talty, who were close buddies and thankfully became friends again. Now, the research for that was interesting because it's the type of final that people nearly don't want to talk about, really. For Galway, it's like it was one to forget, and I'm conscious that I'm dragging that up now. For Dublin, really, there's a bit of defensiveness in that, look, we won it kind of attitude. We got through it. But Talty and Mullins were popping off each other really from the first whistle. Mullins was reborn, came back from injury, a serious accident, and he was flying. He was magnificent against Cork and Páirc Uí Chaoimh. Talty was a super midfielder, athletic, lean. It was a right battle. And I suppose the incident really, if you look at it in the 27th minute, it's a very strong elbow. You know, Brian lashes the elbow back. Brian Talty goes down. And it takes on a life of its own there, you know, rumour, innuendo, what happened in the tunnel. You know, Brian Talty didn't come out for the second half. Brian Mullins is gone. And the other sendings off follow them from there. And of course, Kieran Duff lashes out. If you look at the sendings off, I mean, it's from the 27th to the 35th minute, really. And Dublin are down to 12. Galway have the wind at their backs. And I think the feeling probably was in the ground and on the TV screens that Galway just need to tack on the scores here, be cool, make the numerical advantage count and take it home. And instead, Dublin went further ahead. They were 182 points up at one stage, you know. So I'm straight into the game there, but I think the violence is overstated to a degree. I think it was a dogfight, and Dublin did well to come out on top.
Yeah, because you're explaining that, and I watched back some of the highlights, and kind of that tallies a lot with what I thought. And then I'm trying to think, when you sit down, you said you had the idea in 2013, but when you're sitting down to write this as a one-man play, and like I went and I saw the Tom Crean one-man play before, it was very good. And you think of like other plays from you know, sporting days, like for example Alone It Stands, everyone knows about that, Munster and the All Blacks. So I'm wondering, how do you sit down to do this, and what are the main sort of plot points that make you think I've enough here to put together a play?
Yeah, great question. And it's ironic, my last class before the bell went there, I was teaching Alone It Stands by John Green.
Go away.
And it was running through my mind. Look, I'm a teacher. I teach English. I have an interest in writing. I've been acting on and off for 20 years. But it's a great question. I mean, what gives me the cheek to even try this? I felt that there's a story in the round. I always feel that this type of storytelling, yeah, you're focusing on the match, but it's before, during, after. And culture, you know, what's around that. What was Ireland like in 1983? What were the cultural forces at play with the reaction to the violence? For example, what was the country like? What was the mood like? You know, 18 September 1983. So I really looked at that. The story of the players as well in the background, you know, I look at Kevin Heffernan, I look at Matty McDonagh. Now, I've reenactments of some passages of play. I'm looking at sources from the time. Readings from the Irish Independent. I'm looking at clips from pop culture, Glen Rowe, I'm looking at the music. And I suppose from a personal point of view then, the role of the Sunday game within the GA at the time was huge. And I would have been lucky, even though I was very young, to witness that at first hand with my father, who doesn't exactly court attention now and doesn't particularly like it, but he was heavily involved. And I'm able to kind of reminisce on that as well and reflect on the impact of the Sunday game. So there's a huge amount of cultural touchstones there. The reaction to the game as well, certainly the aftermath. And I like to look at the picture within the play as well of what was the Gaelic football landscape, because this was the first final since 77 that didn't feature Kerry. Kerry had the big blow to Seamus Darby in 1982, but you know, the nightmare was revisited the following year. For years, Cork just couldn't nail Kerry. And Tyke Murphy with the last minute goal, Cork won the Munster and Kerry were out. So it really opened it up. Galway fancied it in Connacht, Donegal and Ulster, Cork and Munster. Dublin, having beaten Offaly and come through an arduous Leinster. They just about beat Meath early on in the campaign. They drew with Meath and won a replay that they were lucky to win. But that Meath team had Liam Hayes, Colin O'Rourke, Jerry McEntee. They would prove within 3 or 4 years that was a great team in waiting. The big one for Heffernan and the Dubs, and I talk about this, yeah, they lost a couple of finals to Kerry, but they beat Kerry as well. I mean, it was 3-2 in the 70s over a series. But Offaly was the one they really needed to nail. The Offaly players coming into the match, they admit now they felt there was no way they were going to lose to Dublin. They felt they were going back to back, that they were going to put 2 in a row together. And massive for Dublin to beat them. Then, if you go to the semi-final, what I talk about, Cork were 4 points up late on against the Dubs in Croke Park, and it was a beautifully worked goal. And Barney Rock, probably the player of the year, of course, was the key man there. And they squeak into a replay, the Dubs. They were more or less beaten, really. And they go down to Cork, Queeve, Cork agitate to bring it to Cork. I look at that in the play as well. It's all the build up to the match. And Cork think, yeah, sure, look, we'll bring them down to Cork, right? We'll get them on our home patch. Sure, Croke Park is a home game. And the Dubs played the match of the year there, really. They won the final in a dogfight on a dark day, but they won in glorious sunshine in Cork. They played fabulous football. McNally, Duff, Rock. I mean, the Dubs were a bloody good team now, but maybe not the best team in the country on paper. All Ireland's aren't won on paper, and that's part of the story too. Galway will feel that generation of footballers. There was an All-Ireland in Galway there, but there's maybe a feeling too that by 83, a lot of those lads were coming almost past their best in some ways. And something I explore in the play as well, Tom Naughton was injured, the key man for Galway, and the feeling is here, and I'm jumping through a lot of topics here, but had Naughton played and circumstances unfolded with the sendings off, they feel that Galway probably would have had enough and should have had enough to win it. They should have won that final. There's no doubt, you know.
And do you jump from character to character depending on the, like, because you're talking about jumping from different teams, Offaly, Cork and so on. Do you jump from character to character and accent to accent throughout the play?
There's a bit of that, I suppose, and to get back to your question, sorry, how do you put that together? That was my intention starting off. You mentioned Lona Stans earlier, but as it evolved, I suppose really I got into the storytelling, and it's theatre, but it's part talk as well, and a document of the era. So there's a lot going on, really. I was thinking about conventional characters, but in the end, I just decided to give an account from my own point of view and my own research. I would have been 6 years of age at the time, so I have a bit of biographical detail. But certainly an overview of what happened and the picture leading up to the final. And the picture of where football was at that particular time. And of course then a major part of the play, it has to come, is the final itself. And I talk about why it was lost. One thing I don't want to do, and I'll make it clear in the play, is that I don't want to be pointing fingers at why Galway didn't win. I don't want to be giving a tactical analysis of the game. I've massive respect for legends such as Matty McDonagh, who was manager at the time. And the more I watched the game anyway, I think there was an element of bad luck. Also, events kind of conspired against Galway a bit. There were some things they could have done better, but it was a strange game. And the nature of sport, it's not an exact science. It's fundamentally unpredictable. Some things just go a little strange, and I thought that second half in particular was just weird in so many different ways. Galway kicked it away to an extent, but they did some good things as well. And to a degree, they ran out of time. There's an element of that. Another 10 minutes, they would have won it. Yeah,
because as I watched the game, or the highlights again there, I was there thinking that Dublin made the most of that win in the first half. Barney Rock had a very fortuitous goal from a poor kick out or a kick out into the wind. And then in the second half, when you're chasing a big deficit, Dublin were able to sit back. I remember Joe McNally getting one score on the break, and he probably could have got a goal because there's no one inside the 45. So Dublin were able to sit back. Yeah, exactly. So Dublin were able to sit back. And I think for Galway, it was very hard to actually work too many goal opportunities other than the one they got, because you're like, the wind is carrying the ball along. Dublin know they can sit back, so they were sort of soldiers of fortune too.
Absolutely, it's a great point, Shane, and I talk about that in the play. You're on the ball because Dublin tactically were very smart, and you have to take into account, without being too critical of the players. Look, it's 1983. Tactically, the game was different then. A lot of it was mano a mano. You let the lads fight out positionally, blanket defences, and all of that was in the future. Heffernan and Dublin reacted very smartly, probably ahead of their time, really, to the circumstances, where Galway reacted probably in the conventional sense, just waited out the numerical advantage will tell. Matty Coleman, great footballer, was around the middle of the pitch. You're right, it was a tough ask for Galway. The wind was still there, the rain stopped. They panicked, I think, without being too critical. They kicked about 7 or 8 balls out over the sideline. And the wind, of course, is only an advantage if you use it properly. And if it's not used properly, the ball will sail over the line. There's a bit of that. Dublin get the bodies back, and there's a rear guard action. Galway did, though, in a 5-minute spell, score 1-3. They went from 1-8 to 2 points to 1-8 to 1-5, and a very well-worked goal. And at that point, really, it looked like they'd rode out the crisis, because there's almost 20 minutes left. It's back to 3 points. You can even see in the body language of the Dublin players that, oh no, this is maybe going to catch us. And in the next 15 minutes, maybe just trying too hard. And it was Dublin that got the next 2 scores. They pushed it out to 110 to 1-5, and then Galway have, 7 or 8 minutes. They tack on 3 points. They possibly go for goals and weren't on, but the Dublin bodies were back, and it's a combination of factors and circumstances, really. I believe from 1-8 to 1-5 with 20 minutes to go, it's one of those things in sport you're watching now thinking, how did they not see it out from there? But give the Dubs credit, they smothered. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah,
and that was a huge factor in the destiny of the final.
And then, like, obviously, kitting yourself out for the play is no problem. The orgaretro.com jersey there, and I'm wearing the Dublin one myself. And
David, it's great. It's off the period,
Yeah, so you can get the jerseys at that website and use the promo code OurGame and you get 15% off. But a big question I have for you is, how daunting is it to do a one-man play?
Yeah, I have experience of it. It certainly is daunting to a degree, and this script is a work in progress. But then I like to see it as an advantage too, because there's a lot of freedom. You're really in control of it. You can let the story unfold. I have a bit of room for improvisation, whereby I'm going to tell the story in the final, and not winging it now, but I have ideas in my mind, and I want to see how I articulate that in the moment. I find it's good, and certainly with the Galway Fringe Festival, to mention the festival, I'm full of admiration because we are going online. It's a bit early for live theatre, but they're making it possible. We had a practice run there earlier in the week. Great videographer, a great setup with sound, etc. I have a camera in front of me, and it feels quite comfortable. It feels quite relaxed. So the practice run went well. There is a certain amount of reading. I'm using storyboards as well, so it can be daunting in the sense you are on your own, and if you're telling a very tight story, that can be the case. But I feel with this, there's a certain freedom. It's quite relaxed. I'm telling the story. There's a bit of music from the period as well, some clips. Charlie Haughey will make an appearance, living beyond our means, and I'm using different ideas and different devices, really, I suppose, and a couple of articles from the period as well. The Sunday Independent would be one, and I'm looking at Vincent Hogan, and a few quotes from my father's time with the Sunday game as well. So I'm looking forward to it, and certainly in the future there's room for revision and change. But I'm quite happy that the script I have at present is ready for a platform and ready to go out to an audience, especially, being honest, a GAA audience as well, who would be very interested in this game and this period.
And there's quite a media influence in your family. I believe your cousin Kieran Murphy was second captains, and then obviously your dad as well. So you're used to performing.
Right. Yeah, Kieran was a very good footballer himself. He played football for Galway under-21s and for Milltown seniors as well. He had a massive interest in GAA, but obviously he has a great journalistic talent. He started off at the Tuam Herald. Like my father, he was in his teens, and second captains has been a huge success story. He works hard, Kieran, great personality. They're very funny, the lads, and they've really carved out a niche for themselves. So Kieran had an ambition really to go into that from probably about 9 or 10 years of age. I'd say he was destined for that. So yeah, there is a line there, and I know that my father is very pleased with Kieran's career and very proud of what he's managed to achieve.
And do you remember as a kid your dad's Sunday game involvement, and were you ever in studio with him, for example?
Absolutely, and in fact I visit that period in the play, towards the end of the play, without giving too much away, but I have great memories of Croke Park. I stood on the sideline actually for some games, which was an amazing privilege. If you think of Croke Park now, it's such a cauldron and everything is so organised with tickets, etc. I used to land myself beside a steward the days before the mobile phones. The old lad would go off and do his interviews, he'd collect me afterwards. So I was privileged. I sat in the commentary box. I would have counted wides just for something to do, I suppose, and to keep a 9 or 10-year-old quiet while the live broadcast was going on. An innocent time in some ways compared to now. A couple of reminiscences. The 87 defeat for the Galway footballers to Cork in a replay. You might remember Larry Tompkins, Summer Tompkins, the equaliser. Galway got beaten heavily in a replay that day. I remember the pain of that from the Galway point of view. Moving to hurling, some of my best memories really of Croke Park, 1987 and 1988, especially the semi and final of 87. And I remember in 1991, being in the tunnel, watching Joe Rabbit, who just been part of. He was young that year, Joe, 21 years of age. Galway team that had been well beaten by Tip, coming down the tunnel and giving the verbals back to the Tip fans who were, and I know you've the interest there. The Tip fans were hanging over the fence, and Tip were waiting a while to beat Galway. Now it was a big win, of course. They got there too in '89 and '91. But Rabbit was giving it the verbals back because he was young and fearless, while the other Galway lads had their heads down. These are kind of images that are in my mind, and I look at that in the play, and I'm privileged now looking back. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I got to see a good few occasions there, and to see how it was done firsthand.
And for those interested in seeing Sam Galway and the 12 Apostles, will you just tell them where the runs will be happening and when?
Absolutely. It's this Saturday night. Now it's online, so if you could go to the Facebook page, Galway Fringe Festival, or the website, you'll see a list of events there. And there is a link then to buy my play through Eventbrite. So it's a virtual ticket, we'll say. And once you buy my ticket, the play will be streamed, and it will be streamed on Saturday night. So we're looking at 8 to 9 o'clock. It's loosely an hour, but it may well be much longer than that. But once you have your ticket, you're fine. So Galway Fringe Festival Facebook page, and you will see Sam Galway and the 12 Apostles there, and you're able to buy a virtual ticket for Saturday evening this weekend. And I would be very grateful to anybody who supports.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you about it, Andrew, and best of luck with it.
Likewise, Shane, and thanks very much for having me. Thank you.